Ukraine's blitzed Russia's space centre with Flamingo Missiles as Russians pull billions from the banks over fears Putin could pinch their finances for the war effort. However, Russian strikes have rocked Kyiv's industrial district as Ukraine's air defence crisis continues and Fedorov challenges Zelensky for presidency.
Kharkiv again.
I'm Philip Ingram, standing in for Jerome Starkey. Welcome to Frontline, your weekly roundup of the latest news from the war in Ukraine. It's been another week of long-range strikes exchanged between the two sides. We'll start with Ukraine first. On August 15th, Ukraine's famed Flamingo Missiles blitzed Russia's JSC rocket and space centre in Samara, around 920 kilometres from the front line. This is a key site for Russia. It's where they developed the Soyuz 2 vehicles used to launch satellites into space. The site was built in the Soviet era and is the birthplace of Russia's first spy satellite launched into space, the Yantar, launched in 1974. Since then, it's continued to produce rockets and satellites for Russia, and also aircraft like the MiG-17 and the Tu-16 bomber. So why is this significant? Well, following Elon Musk banning Russia from using Starlink in February, they scrambled to find a homegrown alternative. This led to the creation of Rasvelt, which is a low Earth orbit or LEO internet satellite constellation which allows Russia to control drones and other devices in the front line. Now, whether it's going to be as good as Starlink, well, almost certainly not. Russia hasn't got access to a lot of the key components that it would have to import to bring that in. China is almost certainly helping here. And it wouldn't surprise me if China is watching what Russia does so it can replicate its own equivalent to Starlink at some stage in the future. But it shows how much reliance there was on Starlink from both sides. And this is where the former Ukrainian defense minister, Fedorov, whenever he spoke to Elon Musk, clearly had a lot of influence with him because he persuaded Musk to stop Russian access. The Russians have panicked. The Ukrainians have exploited it. That's why we've seen advances by the Ukrainians on the front line. And that's why we've seen the Russians stopped in many places of the front line. If Russia can get this new system in space and they can start to use it, then the successes on the front line from the Russian perspective may increase. The pain for the Ukrainians certainly will increase. Before that, on night of August the 13th, Russia's Baltic seaport of Ust-Luga was attacked by Ukrainian drones. That facility handles crude oil, petroleum, fertilizers, and exports around 700,000 barrels of oil a day. You'll remember that the site was hit over multiple days in March of this year, causing a massive $970 million in lost revenue. On August 13th, yet another Wildberries logistic hub in Koledina near Moscow went up in flames, following an overnight drone attack, causing yet another huge fire and smoke cloud. Now this series of attacks going against Wildberries is attacking Russia's logistic support for frontline troops. Wildberries logistic hubs are used for that. It's attacking Russian economics. Wildberries, a lot of their factories are relatively new. They have borrowed a lot of money from certain Russian banks to build these logistics hubs and everything else. If the company collapses, the debt that will hit Russian banks is measured in the billions of dollars. And it's bringing the war home to the average Russian in that there's a lot of small businesses run out of Wildberries. It is the Amazon for the Russians. So if they can't get their prime Wildberries deliveries, or the little business that they're running through there collapses because all of the stock has burnt and it's been labelled as a force majeure by the CEO of Wildberries, then those businesses will go bust. That is the Russian people that are feeling that pain as well. This is significant. The Ukrainians are having a huge success with this. Then on August the 19th, Russia's Ufa refinery was set ablaze following a drone attack. That facility has been targeted multiple times and is responsible for processing about 24 million tonnes of crude oil each year. And in the closer battle, some of you were asking last week whether Ukraine is still enforcing the so-called highway to death along the Russian logistics route between Mariupol and Crimea, this so-called land bridge that there is between Russia and Crimea. Well, in footage released by the Azov Corps, we can see the trains, trucks and oil tanks being targeted across all of the occupied areas. It is no go for Russian logistics. The Ukrainians are dominating that rear area behind the front lines. And they're stopping not just the logistic convoys heading to Crimea, they're squeezing Crimea hard. But those logistic convoys are also supporting Russian activity in the east. Tankers, troop transporters, ammunition carriers, military vehicles and military materiel are all being destroyed. That is causing the Russians some real problems. Interestingly, on the night of August the 18th, according to the Moscow mayor, Sergei Sonyin, Ukraine fired some 500 drones at Moscow. And Moscow intercepted 100% of them. Now, this has drawn a lot of criticism from analysts. As we previously mentioned, following several high-profile attacks on the Russian capital, more air defences were moved to Moscow in a concentric formation to protect high-value targets within the city, meaning Moscow, understandably, is the most protected area of the country. So questions have been raised as to why Ukraine would expend over 600 drones in a highly protected area and where they could have been utilised more effectively elsewhere. Remember, this is a war of numbers. Now, if we look at why the Russians have managed to do this, it's not just about them concentrating their air defences. They've also started to put the A-50 early warning aircraft, or in NATO terms, the mainstay. It's like an AWACS. It's got the big rotating radar dome on the top. The Russians only have a few of them left. The Ukrainians have destroyed quite a number of them. But it is that radar that is giving the early warning of the drones coming in and being used to target Russia's air defense systems in a much more coordinated way. However, for all of those destructions that they claim, there were still a number of explosions across Moscow. And so clearly, I believe it wasn't all 500 or 600 that were destroyed. A few got through. And all you need is one or two. And now going the other way, on the night of August the 16th, Russia launched a giant missile bombardment on Kyiv with 6 Iskander-M missiles. None of them were shot down, and the market in Kyiv was hit alongside several of the buildings. And these were in the industrial district. On August the 20th, a massive combined ballistic and cruise missile barrage killed 15 people in the capital. 44 cruise missiles and over 168 Shahed drones were used in the attack, which hit a children's hospital and residential apartment blocks alongside several industrial warehouses. Russia also hit an epicenter shopping mall in Odessa with its deadly Geran 4 drones, and the National Police headquarters in Zhytomyr was hit by Russian S-800 cruise missiles. These are new short-range or medium-range cruise missiles produced by the Russians, only first seen in 2025, a range of about 500 kilometers, a massive warhead of 150 kilograms, designed to try and get through Ukrainian air defense systems. Russia has also hit 3 of the 9 bridges in Slovyansk, which are essential for Ukraine moving logistics to and from the fortress belt. So what we're seeing here is a tit for tat with Ukrainian drone and missile attacks into Russia and Russian primarily missile attacks supported by drones into Ukraine. The Russians know that the Ukrainians do not have sufficient anti-ballistic missiles. Their ballistic missile defense is non-existent at the moment, and that is why they're using ballistic missiles. But it's clear Moscow is short of them because they're starting to use ballistic missiles that have come from North Korea. They're overwhelming Ukrainian air defense with cruise missiles and with drones as decoys, and they're still getting through to a degree. Ukrainian drone attacks are still being successful across Russia. Oil refineries are still being hit, Wildberries are still being hit, other businesses are still being hit. So the claims that we're hearing were 100% of them have been shot down, I always take with a little pinch of salt because the Russians are big on disinformation or maskirovka. In the close battle, Ukraine has been successfully counterattacking Russian advances in Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, retaking previously lost territory. And in Kupiansk, the battle for the city continues as Ukraine reinforces its troops on the northwest side of the city, which has resulted in them retaking some key positions. The battles on the front line are critical. We keep hearing of towns being taken, of areas under threat, of everything else moving, and sometimes it's the Russians advancing, other times it's the Ukrainians advancing. The reality is it's a stalemate. The Russians advance a little bit, Their troops don't always manage to keep hold of the ground that they've taken. The Ukrainians push them back. In this northern bit around the fortress belt, we're not quite seeing the Ukrainians pushing the Russians back from the positions they were in so far, but the Ukrainians are holding them. What are they doing as they hold them? They're causing a massive attrition. Russian casualty rates are still over 1,000 a day. We're getting up to 39,000, 40,000 plus per month. That is significant. However, in the Kharkiv and Dobropilya, Russia has made successful infiltrations, pushing Ukrainian forces back. And in Kharkiv, Russian forces are close to encircling Ukrainian troops after they've captured several villages, bringing them about 8 kilometers from cutting off a Ukrainian salient in the area. Now, we've seen this before. We've seen the Ukrainians let the Russians get into a strong position where the Russians think that they're managing to encircle the Ukrainians. And then all of a sudden we get elements of one of the Ukrainian corps comes forward in a maneuver style operation and pushes the Russians back. There's no indication so far that the Russians are going to be able to cut the Ukrainians off. There's no indication so far that the Ukrainians are preparing for a counterattack. But if I was making an assessment, or as a betting man, I'd say the Ukrainians have got something up their sleeve. In the political sphere, Mikhailyo Fedorov, the sacked Ukrainian defense minister, has challenged Zelensky in a video posted to his social media. He claims Zelensky's government was rife with corruption and Ukraine's democracy was being held hostage by Russia. This has not gone down well in the West and hasn't gone down well or as well as Fedorov would have hoped inside Ukraine. Fedorov, having been sacked by Zelensky, is now seen as a political rival and a potential rival for the presidency at some stage in the future. And it has been seen that this video he put out, whilst some of the substance in it is accurate, attacking the corruption that still exists, it has been seen as a blatant attempt to start his own presidential campaign at a time when things are politically difficult. So it may backfire on him. Interestingly, it came as Irina Mudra, one of Zelensky's top aides, was raided over corruption allegations for an alleged scheme to launder $3.4 million through a state-owned bank to post bail for Ukraine's ex-energy minister, Herman Halushenko, who was also charged with corruption. Now, if we look at this, that sort of emphasises what Fedorov was saying about the corruption still existing in government. However, the fact that arrests have been made and arrests of close aides to President Zelensky shows that there isn't a cover-up at the top that is stopping people being held to account. I would ask anyone out there to name one democracy that we have in Europe or around the world that hasn't got a level of corruption that's in it. And we hear about that in all our domestic press a lot of the time. It seems that what Zelensky is doing is continuing to push the corruption out of the Ukrainian government. Is there more to do? Oh, there's a lot more to do. Should it be held against him? No, but he should be held to account. And that's what Fedorov tried to do when he was in post. It's what he's trying to do now as a presidential rival. This week was also the first time the British drone, BAE's Nayan drone, been used to strike Russian soil. This prompted the Russian government to threaten the UK with consequences. Now, the Nayan drone, it is a new one-way attack drone that is made of carbon fibre. It looks very sleek. It looks as if it's been designed to evade Russian radar and air defense capability. It carries a relatively small warhead over hundreds of kilometers, but it is launched from a rail, and I've seen British forces using it off the front of a ship, firing it from within woods in the land. I'm sure that's how the Ukrainians have been using it as well in land. And it is probably one of those drones that is not just being used into Russian soil, but is also being used to try and attack Russian infrastructure in that land bridge that there is between Russia and Crimea. It's significant that this has come out in the press, and it's significant that the Russians have suggested there will be consequences. Of course, we have to remember whenever we supplied in-law missiles to the Ukrainians, the Russians said there would be consequences. When we supplied Challenger 2 tanks, the Russians said there would be consequences. When we supported the supply of F-16 fighter aircraft, the Russians said there would be consequences. When we supplied Storm Shadow missiles, the Russians said there would be consequences. There haven't been. It's all talk. And finally, in the ongoing legal case launched by German prosecutors to figure out who sabotaged the Nord Stream pipeline in 2022, a Ukrainian diver has been arrested in Croatia. This is something that I think is going to be he said, she said, we said, they said, as the analysis comes in as to who was behind it. We have to remember that whenever Keir Starmer's properties were attacked in London, two of the individuals that were arrested and charged for that were Ukrainian by background. So the nationality of the individuals that were in there does not necessarily say who was behind it. That is the critical thing that will come out if this ever gets to court properly and all of the intelligence behind it gets released. It could have been the Ukrainians. It could have been the Russians. I'm sitting on the fence on this particular one. Now for your questions. Does France and Germany have the equivalent of Patriots, and could they send them to Ukraine? Well, yes, France and Germany and Europe does have something that is similar to Patriot. It's an anti-ballistic missile, and it's the SAM P/T, or in particular the SAM P/T NG version, produced by a consortium of a couple of companies. It's been chosen by Denmark instead of Patriot to provide its anti-ballistic missile capability, but doesn't really exist in sufficient numbers to be able to supply it into Ukraine in the numbers that the Ukrainians need. And it's the wider infrastructure and training that goes with it. And it's the relatively small numbers that exist at the moment. That infrastructure goes the whole way from the intelligence support that's needed to detect the launches and work out where the ballistic missiles are going to come in from, and being able to get the launchers in the right place with the right missiles so that they can intercept it. Second question, of all the successful drone hits far into Russia, why are they not hitting the front line more of the drones to help push back and reduce Ukrainian losses? Well, yeah, that's a very interesting question, and I was actually asked something similar by a Ukrainian journalist only a few days ago. The Ukrainians are hitting the front lines with drones on a daily basis. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of drones are being used in the front line. That's what these FPV drones are, and that's what are successfully keeping the Russians at bay, causing 1,000, 1,200, 1,400 casualties a day, 39, 40 plus thousand casualties a month. Drones don't carry these really, really big sets of explosives that would have an effect over the huge size of the front line. The front line is 1,000 kilometers long, just over 1,000 kilometers long. What the Ukrainians are doing now is what the Russians have been doing for a while. They're getting their glide bombs. That is a dumb bomb with a smart kit attached to it that can be launched from much further back to fly into the front line and cause that tactical effect on the ground. The glide bombs are 250 kilogram or 500 kilogram bombs that they're dropping onto the Russian defensive positions. Those are having a much better effect than the drones. You even look at the Nyan drone. The warhead is measured in a few tens of kilograms, not the hundreds of kilograms out of there. So the answer is quite simply, they are being used. It's such a big area. We're not getting the same sort of effect as you do with a large drone hitting a warehouse that has got no flame retardant capability in it whatsoever. And final question, is Russia going to mobilize more troops? Well, the bottom line is it has to. It has to get more troops onto the front line. It is currently losing more than it's recruiting at the moment. When's this going to happen? Well, Putin's got his elections in September. There's a lot of talk about the fact that he may bring a bigger mobilization in after he's won that election. He is going to win that election. He's just banned the opposition party and arrested its leaders. But it's how much he's going to win that. It'll be quite big. Not that he will have any influence over what the final result will be. But after he's finished that, there's a lot of talk going on across the West and Western analysts, and increasing talk inside Russia itself that Putin may use that as an opportunity to carry out a bigger mobilization. That will come back and bite him hard. So thank you for watching Frontline this week. I'll be back hopefully next week because I think Jerome is still on holiday. It may be in a slightly different format, but I'll be back to give you some analysis as to what's going on. Remember, if you like what you've seen, please share it amongst your friends, hit like, but more importantly, hit subscribe. Thank you for watching. I'm Philip Ingram, standing in for Jerome Starkey. Goodbye.